You're just going to speak so far.
You're fine.
All right, welcome everybody. Good morning. Thank you for attending the Protecting State Sovereignty press conference. Representative Pohutsky is going to get us started.
Morning, everyone. Thank you all for being here this morning to discuss House Bill 4796, my bill to prohibit the deployment of an armed military force from another state, territory, or district here in Michigan without the governor's approval or a valid, the key word being valid, order from the president. Our country is experiencing a constitutional crisis, spurred by the lawless actions of the United States chief executive and emboldened by federal congressional Republicans that refuse to act. It's imperative that we give the states and our courts every tool available to push back against authoritarianism, and that is what this bill aims to do. The federalization and deployment of National Guard troops into LA and Washington, D.C. represents an unprecedented abuse of executive power, one that runs counter to the very foundations of our country. As elected leaders, we cannot allow these actions to go unchecked. This bill does not reinvent the wheel. In fact, it doesn't expand or limit any existing authority. It merely reiterates federal law into state law, giving our state and our courts one more avenue to push back on the president's unlawful and arguably unconstitutional actions should he attempt to deploy troops into Michigan. There is no single magic solution to this problem, but we've based this bill on laws other, both Republican and Democratic-led states have passed, as well as some of the legal arguments being made in California litigation in order to give Michigan as many tools possible should we need them. Most importantly, we have a duty to do whatever we can to protect the sovereignty of our cities, states, and communities against these lawless actions. Thank you, and I'm going to pass things over to Kyle Zawacki, Legislative Director for the ACLU of Michigan.
Thank you, Rep. Pohutsky. Hello, everyone. My name is Kyle Zawacki, and I am the Legislative Director for the American Civil Liberties Union of Michigan. The ACLU of Michigan is a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization dedicated to protecting and advancing the civil rights and liberties of all the people in our state. Our mission is to ensure that the promises within the Constitution and the Bill of Rights are protected and upheld. I'm here today to express the ACLU of Michigan's support to House Bill 4796 to protect our state sovereignty. This bill is rooted in a simple but vital principle. No military force should operate in our state without the clear consent of Michigan's elected leadership. This principle isn't just about policy, it's about protecting the constitutional rights and democratic self-determination of the people of Michigan. Recently, we have witnessed the deployment of military personnel across the country, which raises an alarm among civil rights advocates, legal scholars, and everyday Americans. These events remind us the line between local policing and federal military occupation can be very thin. The ACLU of Michigan believes that military forces should never be used to police protests, intimidate residents, or bypass local decision-making. This bill affirms a core safeguard that only the governor, elected by all the people of Michigan, has the authority to decide whether troops should operate within our borders. Without that authorization, these forces have no place in our streets, our towns, or our communities. This legislation draws a clear line, ensuring that no external force can bypass Michigan's leadership or impose control over our residents without proper authorization. It safeguards our state, it respects our sovereignty, and most importantly, it protects the rights of every Michigander to live free from unlawful intimidation. Thank you.
Next, we're going to hear from Representative Tyrone Carter.
Thank you, Representative Pohutsky. Good morning, everyone. I'm State Representative Tyrone Carter from Detroit. I represent the 1st District, Detroit, Ecorse, and River Rouge. But before coming to the legislature, I served as the president of my neighborhood organization, and 25 years I spent at the Wayne County Sheriff's Department. And I know firsthand what policing looks like. It's not this. Policing is not tanks in the streets. I'm probably the only person in this room old enough to remember the '67 riots, and I lived on Junction, and tanks and soldiers were going down the streets to Fort Wayne. These are paramilitary tactics. That's authoritarianism, and it will not bring public safety, at least not a democracy. Real policing is about trust, accountability, community partnerships, and it belongs in the hands of local civilian police, not the National Guard or the military. Good policing is about protecting people's rights through due process and upholding the rule of law, not staging political theater. And good policing is about protecting the civilians we serve, not treating them like enemies on the battlefield. That's the role of military. Police are different. Let me give a few examples in Detroit. Currently, we have what we call the neighborhood police officers. They are assigned to every neighborhood. They get to know the community. They get to know the ups and downs. That is what policing and partnership is about. We reduce violent crime in 6 targeted zones with historic reductions between 37 and 83% in just 1 quarter. As a result, Detroit was recently recorded its lowest numbers of homicides in 57 years. So we know what works. We know what we can actually invest in communities and build trust and deliver real safety. That's why I'm here to support this critical legislation, because it ensures that no armed military force from another state can enter Michigan without the governor's permission for an unlawful federal mission. This bill is about protecting Michigan's sovereignty and preserving good policing, not federal invasion based on fabricated claims or excuses for armed outsiders to patrol our neighborhoods. In Los Angeles, Trump federalized National Guard troops and even Marines against the state's wishes. A federal judge later ruled that action illegal. In Washington, D.C., he seized control of local police despite crime being down a 30-year low, an unprecedented abuse of power that leaders across the country condemned. And it's a start. Michigan doesn't need politics of fear. We don't need the National Guard or military or paramilitary groups policing us. This bill makes it clear that Michigan streets belong to Michigan people, and public safety in Michigan will be tough, built through trust, accountability, and partnerships, not intimidation. People elect folks to represent them. The governor has to ask for that help. The federal government should not be giving us things that we don't ask for. They should be helping us with the things we need. I'll turn it over to Representative Pohutsky.
We're happy to take some questions now if anybody happens to have any.
Yeah, I'm just wondering what those avenues in the courts look like that we don't already have.
So by codifying the federal law into state law, it creates the option for us to litigate this in state courts rather than having to rely on federal courts.
Do you find it realistic that maybe Michigan could see troops in this, or is this bill trying to act ahead of it to try and prevent some of those actions like we're seeing in DC?
I've sort of stopped trying to determine what is and is not predictable under this administration. We're seeing what's happening in LA. We're seeing what's happening in Washington, D.C. The Washington Post and The Guardian both reported plans to expand these actions all across the country in multiple different cities. I also represent Detroit, and I have very serious concerns about how this could possibly be weaponized against Detroit. I've also spoken with Representative Reingans about it possibly being used against Ann Arbor or a similarly situated city that has very clearly spoken out against these actions in this administration. So it's not as though we have a crystal ball and we can see something coming around the corner. But this administration has made it clear that this plan can be replicated all across the country. So I think it's important to provide that safeguard, whether we see an acute threat to Michigan or not.
I was wondering if you think that race is playing a role in the government's decision on which cities he's targeting.
Based on the cities that he has targeted and the areas that he is choosing to have occupied, I absolutely think that race is playing a role. Which again creates some concern about areas of our state that might be unjustly targeted using these policies.
We've all seen the videos in LA and in DC, and you talked about it a little bit with you and other representatives up there. For the people who may not have seen all the videos, what were your reaction maybe the first time that you saw or heard about troops going into DC or troops going into LA, and how did you maybe think that you could do something for Michigan?
It's alarming to say the least. I mean, this is a military deployment, an unlawful, unconstitutional military deployment taking place against civilians in our cities. And, you know, this is ancient history at this point. He's been gone a long time, but my father served in World War II. He went in and liberated one of the concentration camps. The things that we are seeing, we keep saying unprecedented, and in a way it is, because it's unprecedented here. Worldwide, it is not unprecedented. And this type of authoritarian activation of our troops and utilizing them against citizens who are engaging in constitutionally protected behavior is very, very frightening. And I think it's really important that no one's trying to be an alarmist here. No one's trying to scare people or be hyperbolic. But I do think it is important that we call out this moment for exactly what it is. And it is deeply, deeply concerning as a person, as an American citizen, but also as a lawmaker.
Let me just say this real quick. So I do have friends at DC. I actually went to the FBI National Academy, which we have people all over the world that have served at the academy. When I see this on the news and you have young people just sitting on a porch and folks show up, you cannot unsee that. That is military. Police don't dress like that. Community officers don't look like that. Those are things that are intimidating. And what about due process? Marijuana is legal in DC. Federally, it's not. So how is a person supposed to know what rules, laws are being, enforced? It just creates too many problems because of jurisdictional. So you have city police that do ordinances. You have state police that do bills and laws. Then you have federal police. How is a regular citizen supposed to know what is what at that given time? So to people that are busy working, that have no idea what's going on, to see this, it could be scary.
I think to add into that sentiment, the concern of seeing troops on the streets as a normalization of a militarized policing force is a step down another direction of an authoritarian playbook. And it's another step forward that we are going to be pushing back against at every avenue.
I want to remind folks, in case you aren't steeped in the history of the march toward authoritarianism in Germany. I was a German major in college. One of the first groups that were targeted were actually political dissidents. Dachau concentration camp was actually first populated with political dissidents and actually homeless and disabled and mentally ill people. So we've already seen other echoes of history. We've seen the echoes of the executive order targeting homeless and mentally ill and disabled people. Now we're seeing these secret camps. Now we're seeing masked federal agents. This is just one thing that we can do with our power as a state legislature, is to try to codify these rules in our state law. We've already tried working on the masked secret police. We have more bills coming soon about due process and habeas corpus to defend our freedoms of just body autonomy to exist. So this is an important step to help protect us from being politically targeted. And many of us here are elected Democrats. That just, the D behind our name is enough to make us a political target. And we have a federal prison in our state. So put the dots together, people.
I actually had a question for Reverend Carter.
Sure.
You were just talking about how the Detroit police, are working to bring down the homicide rate. So what do you make of Mike Duggan's recent comments crediting Trump for the decrease in Detroit's gun violence?
I've heard about it. I haven't read it,
I have.
but well, I'm trying to figure out how you decrease something in 8 months. It just doesn't matter. The thing that bothers me with the Trump administration, though, is that the Department of Justice during its first 4 years never had a consent decree against any police department in this country. So now they're talking about the Justice Department is up and running again. You can't have it both ways. And that's the thing that's scary, the inconsistency and the weaponization of certain operations towards certain communities. Now, we didn't hear any, federal folks going in when they had the floods. When we see catastrophic incidents, we have that expectation that they go there. I don't see that in my city right now.
Well, and what I would just like to really highlight with those comments is we've talked about this. Crime is down across the country. It has been declining steadily for quite some time. It's down across the entire country, including in Detroit. And I don't want to diminish any of the work that's been done in Detroit to make that a reality there. But what I will say is that the specific programs that were highlighted by Mayor Duggan were implemented under the Biden administration. So trying to give credit to the Trump administration seems like a lot of undue lip service to me.
Representative, what's preventing the federal government from ignoring this law or any other state law? If it wants to come in and put in its military force, what's stopping it? How can this law stop the federal government?
No one's trying to stop them from doing anything, unfortunately. Like, I don't think that's, we have to operate in reality. And being able to prevent them from engaging unlawfully is not reality. Let's be honest about that. What we're trying to do is give courts, who seem to be the only entity really trying to push back against some of these actions, all of the tools possible, including our state courts, which is not necessarily they don't necessarily have the ability to litigate this or adjudicate it in state court. So.
Yeah, in front of that, maybe.
Sure.
Like
Yeah.
an interview type.
Sure.
Okay. I don't know if anybody has questions for you.
I think so.
What is it?